fear is largely driven by unknowns, uncertainties, and things you can't control. And the higher the uncertainty, the higher the fear. You look at a kindergartner on day one, never having been to school before, and they're screaming and crying, and they come back at lunchtime, and the kid's got 20 best new friends, and they don't even know mom and dad are at the door because all the anxiety and fear are gone. And so that's how I equate training and preparation. Like on a case of a space launch, when you strap yourself to a big pile of fuel, you're never going to eliminate all the risk. But with the smart engineers, you feel a little more comfortable because you know that the team in mission control can respond to certain things. We've trained for this. We've prepared for this. Same thing on a combat mission as a SEAL. But we know what we're going to do in a variety of different curveballs.
Prominent CEOs, leading economists, iconic investors. Insights from the experts. The Walker Webcast with Willy Walker. See who's next.
Welcome to another Walker Webcast. I am incredibly honored to have Captain Chris Cassidy joining me today to talk about his career as a Navy SEAL, as an astronaut, and now as the CEO of the Medal of Honor Museum and Foundation. Chris's career is quite honestly one of the most impressive and far-reaching of anyone that I've had on the Walker Webcast. And as those people who have been listening to the Walker Webcast for as long as we've had it, I have had some really impressive guests in the past. And so, Chris, let me jump into your bio for a moment, and then I'm going to dive in with some questions on all sorts of things, from what's it like to travel in space to what's it like to be launched out of a submarine to all the great work you're doing today at the Medal of Honor Museum. So Captain Chris Cassidy is a retired NASA astronaut, United States Navy SEAL, and now serves as CEO of the Medal of Honor Museum and Foundation. Captain Cassidy is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy and MIT, was platoon commander of SEAL Team 3, NASA's Chief Astronaut, one of only 3 men to be a SEAL and an astronaut, has spent almost a year in space, has 5 children, has competed in the World Triathlon Championships in Kona, Hawaii, and is the recipient of not only the Bronze Star, but as I was getting ready for this, I went, Chris, and listed all the awards you've won. The Bronze Star with Valor Device and Award Star, Combat Action Ribbon, Presidential Unit Citation, NASA Exceptional Achievement Medal, NASA Space Flight Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, Afghanistan Campaign Medal, Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, and Sea Service Deployment Ribbon. And I can only imagine that when you are in your uniform, all of those medals took up a big part of your left chest. And finally, I would add that, as I said previously, I've had a lot of really impressive people on the Walker Webcast, and not to take anything away from them, but I will say, Captain Cassidy, it is a true honor to talk to you about your very varied and wildly accomplished life and your service to the United States of America. So welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Willy. I'm humbled to be with you, and just looking very much forward to this conversation.
Great. I also have to say, I have to thank my director, Donna Wells, who's a board member at Walker & Dunlop, for introducing me to you and putting all of this together. Greatly appreciate Donna connecting the two of us. So, Chris, if I back up to you growing up in Maine, if I from what I've listened to you talk about your childhood, you were an accomplished young man in high school who was playing 3 sports. You were a good student, but wasn't as if everyone was sitting there saying that Chris is going to go turn the world on fire as it relates to either his academic or his athletic performance. You were working the summers, mowing lawns, and watching your parents manage their restaurant and put in really hard work and time in managing that restaurant to learn that work ethic, which clearly drives you today. But I guess my question, Chris, is when did you realize that your skills were exceptional? When was that moment? And knowing you're going to try and demur on that and say, no, there wasn't that. When was that moment where you all of a sudden said, I got something here?
That's a great question, Willie, and one that makes me think a lot. Because you're right, I don't really ever recalling that in my SEAL team time, and even my first space flight. But I remember probably the time we were training for my second space mission in a big pool at NASA called the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, and I was doing pretty well as a spacewalk kind of member of the NASA Astronaut Corps. And I realized at one point that I was sort of known as one of the better spacewalkers. And that kind of was a little eye-opening to me, like, oh,
Did
wow.
I pause for a second? There are 500 people who have gone to space, so it's a very small cohort of people, and now all of a sudden you're one of the better spacewalkers. There are very few people on the face of the planet who could even say that they're a spacewalker, Chris.
And even fewer off the planet, right? No, but and then after my second mission, I was somehow offered the job of chief astronaut. And that moment was a little bit like, oh, wow, am I equipped to be the chief astronaut? And I kind of had a little bit of self-doubt, like you said. And at some point, after a couple of days of just, wow, am I ready for that? I realized, you know what? I am ready. Life has given me a lot of cool experiences. And those experiences, each one of them was a different arrow in the quiver. So it's probably when I became chief astronaut that I realized, oh, geez, I guess I'm regarded as a leader within the astronaut corps. So
Start a legacy. Start turning dreams into realities. A better world begins with you. Better communities start with us.
It's fascinating to me that it's not surprising to me that in getting to that answer, you jump over multiple moments where you were selected as a leader amongst leaders. I mean, I can go back in your story to you forgetting to apply to the Naval Academy and happening to go on a trip with a friend of yours to Washington, D.C., taking the initiative to go to Annapolis, meeting someone in the admissions office who after you'd found out that your congressman had sent the letter in recommending you to the Naval Academy, but you hadn't remembered, or not remembered, you didn't know that you also had to put in an application on your own. And that gentleman calling you up for whatever reason, for whatever you struck him as in his office that day in Annapolis, as someone who is special enough for him to go and say, you need to go to Navy prep for a year, and we'll give you a full ride to Navy prep, and then you can go on to the Naval Academy. I mean, at that moment, something had to come to you to say, wonder what he saw in me that he didn't see in the other thousands of kids who he could have given a scholarship to Navy prep.
You know, what's interesting, as a young, naive 17-year-old, like from my little bubble in a small town in Maine, I didn't view it in that lens. I viewed like, oh, wow, I'm so lucky that this guy gave me the opportunity. It wasn't until later in life that I reflected back on that moment that I realized how special that was, because he was interacting with, I presume, kids all throughout the application cycle that year. And I don't know what those interactions were like, but somehow he gave me an opportunity. And I realized as a more adult with some maturity, realized, wow, that was pretty special. For whatever reason, he looked in my eyes and said, I'll give it to this guy. And particularly, Willie, like you and I now are at a stage of life where we can be helpful to others. And we've been in that position, kind of looking at the young person saying, all right, this is one I believe in.
Yeah. So let's jump through Annapolis for a moment. And I would also posit to you that as you sat there in your dress whites at some ceremony, whether it was at the beginning or at the end of being at the Naval Academy, everyone who goes to the Naval Academy understands that they are special, that they have been selected from a broad pool of Americans to go and serve at the Naval Academy and then go on and give our country 5 years of service as an active member of our military and armed services. But let's go through to BUD/S. You decided to take the path towards being a SEAL. What was it? Because as I've heard you say, when you're at Annapolis, you don't necessarily get profiled to go one way or the other, to be a sub commander, or to try and go be a SEAL, or all the other varying, or be a Marine, what have you. What was it about being a SEAL that made you say, I want to go to BUD/S and give this a try?
Yeah. So I entered I graduated high school in '88. and NAPS in 89. So that 89 to 93 period is when I was at the Naval Academy. If you recall, that was pre-internet, pre-Navy SEAL common word in our nation's, on talking heads on the various news channels. None of that existed. So I was completely unaware about Navy SEALs when I showed up there, and I saw a couple of the pins, the trident on their unit, a couple guys in the uniform, and they had some mentors on the staff there, and I was pretty impressed by those gentlemen. And that initial impression of, wow, they kind of look like they're squared away, drew me to start going to the morning PT sessions. And that was not because I wanted to be SEAL, it was just because I was interested to be around those people. They seemed motivating, and they were. There was two of them. And that initial spark, I think it was not freshman year, it was sophomore year, that I really kind of got engaged and was doing the morning activities and attending some special invitation things for folks that were interested in being a SEAL, and then really caught the bug probably junior year. And then between junior and senior year, you can go out to California and do like a 1 month session of a BUDS, kind of like a little sampling of what it is, for you to decide if it's for you, and for them to assess you. Do we want this person to get one of the billets? And it was kind of in that process that then the fire really got lit. Once I got out there and I was in the environment, getting wet and sandy, realized that I could hang. Like, I was a good runner, decent swimmer, so none of that was stressful for me. And the program gets you physically fit. They don't expect you to do on day one what they expect you to do on graduation day. So it's a steep curve, but they get your body ready. And so I was adaptive and kind of left that summer going, yes, this is for me. I love the environment. I love the camaraderie. I know I can hang physically. It's just a matter of staying healthy, and off I went.
So on that, two things. First is, there were clearly some dark moments. I've been honored to know a number of SEALs and talk to them about BUDS and getting through it. There were clearly some dark moments where it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're in 52-degree seawater, and you've been in it for 4 hours, and your whole body is shaking. What was that thought or that place you went to, Chris, that gave you quite honestly, the fortitude to get through those moments? Was there something in your childhood, or someone who had said to you, you can do anything you put your mind to, Chris, that was that in that loop when things got really dark and hard when you were in BUDS training?
No, but I think I'm just innately a person that doesn't like to disappoint people that are believing me or love me or I love them. I just don't want to let folks down. And I remember in plebe, my first summer at NAPS when I was 18. It was hard then, not like Navy SEAL training, but for a person coming right out of high school. But I had that was the first time I remember thinking, I don't want to let my family down by not getting through this. And that theme has kind of stuck with me throughout all of life, is this fear, not of failure, but fear of letting my teammates down. And in BUDS, you're organized in these things called boat crews. It's usually like 6 to 8 people that you're physically carrying a boat together, usually organized by height, because otherwise the boat's pretty crooked if the one guy's really short and one guy's really tall. So you're with your boat crew. And in those dark moments, like you said, because it does happen, it happens, frequently, where it's 3 a.m. and you're cold and every muscle in your body is contracting and you're shivering uncontrollably. It's not wanting to drop the boat so your corner of it falls, or not wanting to let go of the log that you're holding over your head, because it takes every single one of you to hold those monstrous logs. Or just quite simply swimming along on a cold ocean swim, and your buddy's in the kicking and striding and groove, and you don't want the buddy line to go taut as he starts dragging you, or vice versa. So it's that moment of team camaraderie, love of shipmate that has always kept me going.
So you talk about swimming in the dark ocean off Coronado. First of all, I can't imagine being out in that ocean at 2 o'clock in the morning with the sharks and the cold and everything else. I'm sure lots of other people watching this can sort of associate with my fear of that.
But we call the sharks the man in the gray suit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if the Navy actually put someone in a gray suit to freak you out. But nonetheless, as I think about that, and I don't want to skip forward here because I want to stay on this. I want to stay to being a SEAL commander and going into combat. But when I think about that, Chris, of you being in the ocean, the big dark ocean in the middle of the night, or you being in not only harm's way, at war in Afghanistan, I think about you being launched out of a submarine into one of those small little subs, which, as I listened to you give another interview, you said the two favorite places that you've been on Earth were in that little sub being launched out of a submarine, which would scare the you-know-what out of me, and then also being up in space looking through the cupola of the International Space Station looking back at Earth. Those two places, for me, Willy Walker, would freak me out. And I spend I don't know how many hours a year in airplanes flying all over the place. But what is it that has gotten you so relaxed about being in situations that most of us would be petrified to be in?
I think I've thought a lot about this, Willie, about this concept of fear. And I think fear is largely driven by unknowns, uncertainties, and things you can't control. And the higher the uncertainty, the higher the fear. And at the very basic level, I kind of love this analogy. You look at a kindergartner on day one, never having been to school before, and they're screaming and crying, and mom and dad's dragging their hand to the door, but yet they come back at lunchtime, and the kid's got 20 best new friends. They're smiling. They don't even know mom and dad are at the door because all the anxiety and fear are gone. You know the environment now. And so that's how I equate training and preparation. You're never going to, like on a case of a space launch, when you strap yourself to a big pile of fuel, you're never going to eliminate all the risk. But with the smart engineers and the well-designed spacecraft with redundant systems and emergency, ejections and things you can do with a variety of things, you feel a little more comfortable because you know that the team in mission control can respond to certain things. You guys can respond to certain things as a crew, and that drives the anxiety down. And you just know, okay, we've trained for this, we've prepared for this, we can battle our way through whatever those situations are. Same thing on a combat mission as a SEAL, where that's the whole point of detailed mission planning is you assess every single risk and put thought and kind of what happens if this, and then at NASA, we call it the next worst failure. Okay, we're given this scenario. What's the worst thing that can fail that would make our lives miserable? And then kind of do one more. We generally do two what if next worst case failures. And I love that concept because then you as an individual and you as a group feel like, okay, there's always risk here, but we know what we're going to do in a variety of different curveballs.
First of all, what really I love hearing there as it relates to the preparation and the planning is I've also heard you talk about that you can't control the outcome of something you strive to accomplish, but as long as you have gone and given it your all, you have to take away from that you did everything you could to achieve the mission. You may or may not have achieved it, but as long as you gave it your all and did everything in your own power, then you take that failure and you move on from it. And I think a lot of what you're talking about fear is very analogous to the way you look at accomplishment as well. One of the things, Chris, as I hear you talk that through, there's a common trait amongst the handful of Navy SEALs that I've gotten to know over the years, and that is what I'd call quiet leadership. I think all of us look at SEALs as these paragons of leadership from a physical standpoint, from a mental standpoint, from just generally sort of say, wow, SEALs are these incredibly talented individuals who have the strength and the mental capacity. But there's also a sereneness that I think somewhat is contradictory to what we typically would associate with leaders. There's, a lot of leaders have a lot of bravado. They talk a lot rather than listen a lot. They act quickly and take leadership. Whereas most of the SEALs that I have known, and in doing background on you and meeting you today, I can clearly tell there's a certain sense of sereneness or quiet leadership. Do you think that's innate, or do you think that's taught through SEAL training?
I think maybe a teaspoon of innateness, but more sort of learned behavior. That's just my opinion through experiences and life. Where that light bulb really dawned on me, for me, was I was a very young SEAL officer. I was not in charge of our platoon. I was kind of just a member of it and watching other leaders, but I was still an officer. In military structure, officers are, even the junior one is senior to the most experienced enlisted guy, and we were doing a couple weeks of training, doing some land warfare things, and they're long days, and you got a lot of gear to prep as an individual and as a team gear, and it can kind of consume you. And a well-run unit is always like, the evolution starts at 10 a.m. A well-run unit is standing there at 9:55 with all the gear done, all their things ready, and the instructor shows up and says, "Okay, let's go." And ones that don't quite have their act together, people are straggling in at 10:03, 10:04. All the gear's not prepped, and I remember learning a little bit that in buds, but then seeing it now I'm in a real unit and watching it be exhibited by the senior enlisted guys. They were always squared away. They always had their gear perfectly done. And so I started to emulate that. And then when I became in charge of my own SEAL platoon, that behavior was there. And I always tried to just have my own act together and be 5 minutes early with all the stuff done, and just helping make sure that the team did too. And I remember at one point, one of the guys came up and said, "Hey, sir, we appreciate you always being on time." It was one of the instructors actually said, "We appreciate." No, he said, "Hey, Cassidy, why are you here 5 minutes early?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to lead by example." And he goes, "You are." And that coming from a senior enlisted Navy SEAL there was a training guy that I looked up to, meant a lot, and it reinforced, okay, you can really model good behavior, and the unit will adapt, and will do that too.
SEAL Team 3 was ready to be deployed in November of 2001 when tragically 9/11 happened. And you were in Coronado and saw 9/11 happen, and didn't know whether you were going to be deployed that day or the next day or a week later, but you knew it was coming. One of the things, Chris, as I heard you talk about how SEAL teams are named as it relates to regions around the globe, I was interested that SEAL Team 3, it corresponded to the Middle East. And I was just curious, how come SEAL Team 6, is SEAL Team 6 the East Coast Middle East team and SEAL Team 3 is the West Coast Middle East team? Because it seems like in the history of the warfare against the war against terror, that SEAL Team 6 is the one that's always referenced, while SEAL Team 3 also had the geographic region of being the Middle East team. What am I missing there as it relates to SEAL Team 3 versus SEAL Team 6?
Yeah, that's an insightful question. So just SEAL Team 101, there's East Coast SEAL teams and West Coast SEAL teams, Norfolk, Virginia, Coronado, California. On the East Coast, SEAL Teams 2, 4, 8, and 10 are the SEAL teams there in Norfolk, and SEAL Teams 1, 3, 5, and 7 are out in Coronado. So you noticed I didn't say 6. The team that at one point was known as SEAL Team 6 has a different name. The common in the world, people still refer to it as SEAL Team 6 and such, but it's really Naval Special Warfare Development Group. And that is a separate chain of command. It's under the Joint Special Operations Command along with Delta Force. So Naval Special Warfare Development Group and Delta Force are our nation's tier 1 response units to anywhere in the world. So they are not sort of under this same geographic spread that the numbered SEAL teams are.
Got it. Super helpful and makes it makes a lot of sense then on why SEAL Team 6, for instance, was the one to go into the compound after Osama bin Laden, while the Middle East corresponded to SEAL Team 3. You've seen a lot during that period as far as being a Navy SEAL. 2 tours over in Afghanistan, leading your platoon and successfully leading. I guess the question I have for you is you'd been so successful there and were at the precipice of being deployed abroad again when someone mentioned to you potentially becoming an astronaut. And one of the things that surprised me, Chris, was I had always thought, as you had, that you needed to be a pilot to be an astronaut. And you actually don't need to be a pilot to be an astronaut. And yet because of that, you were able to go and apply to be an astronaut. And I heard you tell the story in a very self-deprecating way of having gone down to Houston and you're competing with these wildly talented people. And you sort of called your wife and said, don't jump on the realty site quite yet. I'm not exactly sure I'm going to get through. There's 16 people around me who are amazingly talented. And then there's all these other groups that are competing for these spaces. Not surprising to those people watching and to me studying on you, you were selected to become an astronaut. What was it at that moment that said to you, I want to step away from my SEAL career, being a SEAL leader and, if you will, combat warfare, to going into a equally as important, but much less sort of, if you will, critical role? And then also wrapped up in that a little bit, Chris, was this. In my SEAL friends, one of the big things that I have seen them all struggle with is the adrenaline rush that comes from being a SEAL. The being called up and sent to the most dangerous places on earth and defending our country, defending our democracy, and that adrenaline keeps them going. And as much as it produces significant problems from a family standpoint and from a lifestyle standpoint, there's something about that adrenaline that's almost addictive to them. How did you put that aside to go and move into your career as an astronaut?
Well, the first part of that, I didn't feel like, okay, I don't want to be a SEAL anymore, so I'm going to look for something else. It was not that. I realized, like you correctly said, oh, you don't have to be a pilot to be an astronaut? Well, what the heck? Let me just apply and see what happens. If I get selected, that would be so freaking cool. And if I don't, no big deal. I love what I'm doing as a SEAL, and I probably would have stayed for 20 years as a career doing that, remaining in the Navy. I just really liked being in the Navy, and I really liked the job as a SEAL. So it wasn't an effort to try to be done with either one of those two things. And as for the adrenaline rush, never really thought about it in that context, because I think it's healthy to be a new guy periodically in life and push yourself to learn new things. And when you get too comfortable in what you're doing, and it's almost easy to be complacent and you don't kind of push your capacities as much. So I was at a point where I don't say I was the best SEAL in the whole world, but I felt comfortable doing it, and I felt comfortable in that world. And when I became an astronaut, it was all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I got a lot to learn. I've never studied line drawings of valves and electrical systems of vehicles. I've never had to speak publicly to schools and communities. That's a whole other thing about the job of an astronaut. I've never had to do a spacewalk. I don't know how to put a suit on. So all of those things were learning curves. So it just kind of kept me engaged. And there was, because of, I think, all of that, my brain was constantly going with, how do I become the best astronaut I can be? I never really felt this void where adrenaline was, because as soon as you get assigned to a mission, you know that big day is coming where you're going to have the adrenaline rush.
I was just gonna say, as I think about all the training you did, and then also literally, as you said previously, being strapped to a fuel tank and launched into space, no lack of either fear, adrenaline, or danger.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And everybody always thinks of launch day as the scary day, but reentry is equally so. All the conservation of energy that is real all that energy that you see that you're dealing with on launch day is behind you. All the energy that you have to now deal with on reentry day is right in front of your bottom, and you got to go through all that heat. So it's equally as intense coming home.
So in many interviews that I watch of yours, lots of people want to be like, what's it like to be in space? And I'm gonna skip over that. And if anybody wants to hear Chris's response to what's it like to be in space, there's lots of video out there on him talking about that. I do love the analogy you put though, Chris, is that you take, you're like you act like a 5-year-old, even though you're 50 years old, out in space, and that the fun of being there never sort of subsides. But I want to back up to your first space mission when you were in the shuttle. What is there anything that you had done previously, or is there training they give you to give your body the sense of what it's going to be on launch day, when everything from the film that I've seen, it's incredibly loud. It's incredibly, the vibrations are just shaking your body. And I think about like the launch, and, I get freaked out when we bounce around in the clouds with a little bit of turbulence. I can't imagine the amount of turbulence that you feel as you're getting launched off of the launch pad. Is there anything that prepares you for that feeling?
Yeah, not really, actually. That's a great question, because the simulator that we have a variety of different ones, some that are just stagnant in a room, all the way up to full motion ones that have great graphics and the whole cabin is moving on hydraulic gimbals. Those give you a fantastic understanding and appreciation and anticipation of the displays and the visuals out the window and slightly the movement of things. But there's no simulator in the shuttle, or in the case of I launched in my other 2 missions were in a Soyuz. There's no simulator that shakes your molar teeth. You got to wait until the real launch happens. In fact, in the case of the shuttle, the 2 white solid rocket motors on the side are solid fuel. It looks and feels like a pencil eraser, and the orange tank has liquid fuel. The first 2 minutes, the thrust is largely coming from the solid rocket motors, and at least in the case of Shuttle Endeavour, that those burn very bumpy, and right off the launch pad, in those first 2 minutes, it was alarming to me, like how violent it was. My mind's eye, it was not going to be that crazy. And I remember looking over at the commander, and in my head, I was like, well, if he's cool with this, then so am I. And he's just like, Houston, Endeavour roll program. He's just very calm as a cucumber. I'm like, okay, I guess this is normal. And then the 2 minutes went by, and the solids came off, and it was just silky smooth after that. The liquid engines burned really, really smoothly. And it was almost like driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour. You're going fast, but other than the G-forces, you couldn't really tell.
Do you ever hit any turbulence in space? I mean, as you were up on the International Space Station for 6 months, is there ever any, none? It's cool as a cucumber. Yeah.
You're just zipping along. The only sort of things in the atmosphere that you have to deal with are we call it micrometeor debris. So small particles that are able to be tracked on the ground. They put some ellipse of probability where it's going to be, and when your ellipse intersects with that ellipse, then they have you maneuver the space station to a different altitude, and you don't even hardly feel those maneuvers. The space station is so massive. We put, in fact, my favorite instrument on board the space station is a peanut butter plastic jar with the wrapper peeled off of it so you can see, and Skittles or M&Ms inside it. And they're just kind of moving around normally. And when the engine fires, they all kind of slowly go to one side of the jar. It's the best G meter we have because it's very visual, and you can't feel it usually in your body, but you know that the M&Ms are doing a certain thing, and it's indicating that you're moving.
And you're 250 to 300 miles above Earth. That's way too far out for you to have to worry about running into satellites. All satellites are inside of that?
All satellites are above that.
All satellites are above that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Even the new closed Earth satellites that are going up that Elon Musk has put out there for his network?
I believe so. I don't want to say all satellites and categorically say something that might get me.
No, I got it.
But we are beneath especially like geosynchronous satellites that are always in the same spot over Earth, because as Earth rotates, they're way up there. And then the infrastructure of communication satellites and navigation satellites are below that, but above this space station's altitude.
So it won't surprise listeners to the Walker Webcast that I want to talk about fitness for a moment and fitness in space. But you clearly, I mean, your whole allure to being a Navy SEAL was going and doing that early morning workout and seeing what it was like from a physical standpoint to be able to be a Navy SEAL. So, exercise and physical strength has been part of your DNA for your entire professional career. But I was fascinated about what you need to do in space to maintain bone density. And so the exercise you do up there is not necessarily to keep off the pounds. It's actually to maintain bone density. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 3 exercise devices on the space station. One is a treadmill, one is a bicycle, and one is a weight machine. I'll talk briefly about each of those. And NASA dedicates about 2 hours per crew member per day to exercise. And without context, you don't understand how big of a deal that is. Astronaut time. So every minute of an astronaut on board the space station is a valuable resource like oxygen, food, water, or gas that is monitored and managed by the mission control team. So for them to allot 2 hours to anything is a big, big deal. And just like you correctly said, Willie, it's not because they want us to come back with, beach biceps. It's all about bone health. If we did nothing in terms of exercise, our bones would rapidly decay in their bone density, and you'd be like a very serious osteoporosis patient pretty rapidly within a couple weeks of getting up there. And so we've learned over several decades of manned crew time on board the space station is weighted exercise it mitigates it to zero. Like you come back with the same bone density that you launched with if you do the weight program, which takes about an hour per day to do. And it's largely it's whole body workout, but it's largely biased towards your big muscle groups, your hips, your back, your butt, your thigh muscles, to kind of really make a difference. It's not so much about upper body things. The treadmill is a normal treadmill. It's actually, I think, a Woodway treadmill.
Oh yeah, the best.
Yeah, it's a good one. And but they modified the sides and stuff, and the push button interface is a little bit different. But the big thing is if you weren't fixed to it, somehow you'd float away as you ran. So we wear a backpack harness without the backpack, so like shoulder straps and waist thing, and bungee cords hooking from your hips down to the floor. And so just like you can vary the intensity of your workout on a treadmill here at home, you can incline or you can speed the belt up. We, of course, can speed the belt up, but our version of incline is tightening the bungee cords or not. Or loosening them. So that's how you can kind of vary the intensity of your workout. The bicycle is interesting. There's no seat. You don't need a seat. You just clip your feet in, kind of hold on to some side things and pedal away. And the weight
is so cool. That redefines clip-on. That redefines the idea of clipping into a bike because you're clipping your feet in and you don't even need a seat. That's just fantastic.
You don't even need a seat. And then the weight machine is that because people go, how in the world do you lift weights when weightlessness? It's actually these big cylinders, air cylinders, and you crank a piston up and down in those cylinders, and it gives you different pneumatic resistance. And then the piston is connected to a bar, and that bar you can adjust to do squats or deadlifts or put a bench in there and do some other exercises. So that's how we get the load on our bones.
What was it like coming back to Earth and getting on a treadmill for the first time and not having to strap on that shoulder strap to keep you down? You must have been like, this is the greatest thing in the world. I could actually run without being strapped down to the thing.
Yeah, the space treadmill is really good. But the one thing is now all of that load, like your body weight, is all coming through your shoulders, kind of like wearing a heavy backpack. So if you ever tried to run with a heavy backpack, it's a little bit like a lumbering kind of awkward thing. So you don't have the same kind of gait that you would on Earth. So that's the really nice part is you come back and you're not encumbered on your shoulders with that. And it's really nice. The interesting thing is, Willie, when you come back, although our muscles are strong and fit, all of them, they're not used to being coordinated together and tied into your eyeballs and your inner ear and your what do you call that thing? Neurovestibular system. And so you're very wobbly, you're very unstable. So those first couple treadmill runs, you've got your strength and conditioning person right there on your elbow because you're gonna fall, and you're just kind of like a gangly newborn deer.
How long does it take to get back to a sense of,
Yeah.
does it take a week?
I generally say totally normal. Like I could go play 3-on-3 basketball in about a month. Uh,
Wow.
if you and this is the other thing I typically say, if you saw me in the grocery store at 2 weeks, you probably can't tell, but I can still tell. There's still a little bit of off. But the bulk of the recovery, and our brains are kind of like riding a bicycle, right? Like the more you come back from space and more you go up and adapt to space and come back on your second, third, fourth missions, you just get a little better at it, I think. I don't think there's data that shows that, but anecdotally, for me, each subsequent mission was a little bit faster to readapt. Your body
So
remembers it.
a couple things. One, you do talk about that looking through the cupola back at Earth is just one of those experiences that you just, you carry with you for your entire life, and you kind of pinch yourself when you're sitting there looking through that window in the International Space Station back down at Earth. But you all, and I also heard you talk, Chris, about the fact that the food in space is better than the food as a SEAL, which I thought was interesting that you eat quite well. The other thing that I watched a video that actually showed one of your colleagues running on the treadmill, which to anybody who wants to see it, it is really quite fascinating how they get strapped in there. But the reason that your colleague running on the treadmill was shown was on a video that you did to show people how you actually go to the bathroom in space, which I have to tell you, I was at the Real Estate Roundtable in Washington on Tuesday morning, and Senator Mark Kelly, who is a former astronaut, we're sitting there, and there are these questions about the economy and about this and that and what's happening in Washington. And then there was a lull in the questions, and Senator Kelly's sitting there, and he goes, "Look, I mean, doesn't anyone have a question here? I mean, don't you want to know what it's like to go to bathroom in space?" And like everyone in the room starts laughing hysterically. I get this idea of what it's like to go to the bathroom in space. His comment was carefully. And then it was your video that I got to go watch that actually shows you exactly how you actually do it in space, which I will say to anybody who really wants to see how it is done. Chris does a fantastic video that walks you through all the processes. And to anyone who's had a kid and has had one of those diaper, the easiest way for me to summarize is to summarize your 5-minute video on how you go to the bathroom in space is basically you're using a diaper genie for adults, is really sort of the way to go about that. What was the other, as you think about being in space, what's the other thing that people just don't get? You're up there for 6 months. Do you have any private time? Like you're in this capsule with you were up there, you were in space with 13 people, well, you and 12 other people, which is the most that have been in space simultaneously ever. So you were there with the most people who've ever been up there. What's it like to either be with 12 other people or just with the 2 other people inside of the International Space Station, that to those of us who are on Earth just can never sort of understand how unique it is?
Well, I'm generally quiet person, so for me, the less people, the better. I love all my crewmates, but the normal steady state shuttle or space station crew is 6. It's now 7 because there's one Soyuz, which is 3 seats, and a SpaceX craft, which is 4 seats. So those 2 make 7. But at the time when I was there, the shuttle had 7 seats, so there were 6 people up there. We can't arrive with 7. That was the 13 for 2 weeks long. And my other 2 missions were where I lived there for 6 months. One, I had 6 people, myself and 5, for the whole time. And then in 2020, most of the time was just myself and 2 Russian guys, which was great because then there was no line for the bathroom, the exercise machines, you could use them whenever you want. There's a couple kind of key places where your sweaty t-shirts dry really quickly by the air conditioner. You don't have to fight for who gets the prime spot. Your toothbrush is always right in the where you can get it. You don't have to put everything away. So anyways, there's a lot of benefits to having fewer folks. But how do you get your private time? Each person has their crew quarters, which is about the size of a refrigerator, sort of. It sounds small, but you can use the whole three-dimensional volume when you're floating. So your sleeping bag goes on one wall, your bags with your clothes and your underwear and your socks and your workout things are one place. So we always have like one nice collared shirt for whenever we got to be on TV, and then pictures of your family, a computer and a mirror and stuff like that. So whenever you need space, you can get it. And the beauty of myself and two Russian guys, just three people on the whole space station, we would spend most of the day not seeing each other, and we'd come together to eat at lunch and dinner and get our social bill and check in, see how your day was and that sort of thing. But it was really fun to have the whole place to kind of yourself. I enjoyed that very much.
Two final things on that, and then I want to go to Mars, and then I want to come back to your current job. You were married as an astronaut. I was just curious, are single astronauts allowed to fraternize up in space, or is there a strict rule against men and women up in space? I mean, do they say, I mean, I've been to certain retreats where they're just sort of like, I went to a program called Hoffman out in California, and you're there for a week and they lock you down and they say, there's nothing going on here, folks. So whether you're married or single, there's none of that stuff. Is that an explicit rule by NASA, or is that left to people's own discretion, if you will?
Yeah, nobody talks about that, but pretty much most folks are married, and there's a handful of single astronauts. But you're up there, it's long days, you're working. I never really thought that there was any chance of that stuff going on. Even on the shuttle, when it's only 2 weeks long, it's such a confined space. If you really had the will, you couldn't find the place to follow through on your will.
I love it. That's great. The other thing that I think is interesting, given where U.S. and global relations are today, and the trade wars that are going on, and the war in Ukraine and relations with Russia, is that, the U.S. space program has been in partnership with Russia for decades. And you actually spent almost 2 years outside of Moscow in the Russian training facility working with cosmonauts in partnership. And I saw the trade-off in command from, I believe it was your 63rd mission to the 64th mission, I think it was. Yeah. And you had, you were handing it off to a Russian cosmonaut who was the lead, Sergei, who was going to be the lead of the next mission coming in. It's interesting to look at that and the partnership that has been forged between the United States and Russia in space, and it's endured, even though we have more of a Cold War happening back on the face of the earth.
Yeah, it's really interesting because now I've been out of NASA for 4 years and kind of viewing it more as a civilian, and it surprises me that we're still able to cooperate and do it. But I think it's a great example of technical challenges where you're trying to do a risky endeavor together, whether it's climbing Mount Everest or launching to space. Those people, the sort of political sides of it aren't factored into what do we got to do to execute this mission safely. Now, it was interesting to live over there for many, many months in Star City and have very close Russian cosmonaut friends and Russian engineer friends and instructor friends. They're people too. So they, just like here in America, we've got left-leaning folks and right-leaning folks, and you've got friends who are probably all those. On the Gagarin Space Center, it's the same thing. They got people that really support Putin, and they got people that are really skeptical of Putin's agenda, and it's just a matter of comfort level in those conversations. My second mission, in 2013, there was one of my crewmates, cosmonauts, was 60 years old. He got selected as a cosmonaut in the Soviet Union timeframe. And now he was a Russian cosmonaut when it switched over. And the other gentleman was 34 at the time, and he only had ever been a Russian citizen his whole life. It was fascinating for me, Willie, to see how the two of them processed the same situation. The three of us would be sitting there, whether it was a training thing or a public affairs thing or walking in the Kremlin. The differences in how the two of them acted and responded to certain situations was enlightening to me. Of their mindset. And I was very comfortable having open conversations with the young guy. And I just knew it wasn't wise to have any deep conversations with the older gentleman.
It's also amazing that you were up in space when the COVID pandemic hit and came back to, if you will, a very changed world from when you left and went up to space to coming back in the midst of COVID. I've heard you talk about Mars and your belief that we'll get to Mars in the next 20 to 30 years. One of the things that I was fascinated by as I did a little bit of research on that, Chris, was that it will take about 9 months for us to get to Mars, but then it'll take 3 years for the return trip. Can you explain why you can get out there so much quicker than you can get back?
Well, the planets are moving, right? So you launch when it's to your favor and to make the trip the shortest for the trip out there. And then you spend some period of time, and when you return, and I'm not a astrophysicist or anything, so there's people that know much more than I do about this. You stay there for some period of time. When you're ready to leave and the mission's done, the planets are rotating in such a way where it's not going to be the same trip to get back. I don't know if it's exactly 3 years and 9 months, but your ratios are right. It's longer, or you can opt to stay on the surface longer and wait for the planets to be again aligned in a position that is favorable for your journey, and return that way. But the total duration of the mission would be the same. One of the things that's super fascinating, because those times are with existing rocket technology, right, where you fire a big engine and for some number of minutes and then you coast for the rest of the months. But there's really advanced research and what do they call it? Technical readiness levels of rockets that give low thrust but continuous thrust. So you basically accelerate every second. You're accelerating for half the trip, and then you flip around and decelerate to the point where when you get to the Mars gravitational pull, you can enter orbit, and that cuts the trip down substantially, on the order of like a month. Yeah.
Wow. That's fascinating. So let's transition to your current work and the museum. You raised $285 million to build the Medal of Honor Museum. Talk for a moment about the museum, the genesis of the museum. I guess there 40 since the Civil War. 40 million Americans have served in the armed forces, and 3,500 of them have won the Medal of Honor. It is the highest medal to be received by members of the United States military. What's the genesis of the museum? And I'm going to put up a couple pictures here in a moment, Chris, as we just talk about it, to give people a sense of the beauty of it and how you have set it up. But talk for a moment about, I guess, what attracted you to it beyond the fact of being an incredibly decorated and honorable person yourself, and what you're trying to achieve by the building of the museum and establishment of the foundation.
Right. The first part, what attracted to me of it, it's interesting in life. You don't know about opportunities until you know about opportunities. And so when I was wrapping up my NASA career in 2021, I was thinking I was going to go work for one of these commercial space companies, and I had kind of feelers out in that direction, when a buddy of mine who's affiliated with this project called and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming up and learning about the Medal of Honor Museum?" Of course, I knew about the Medal of Honor, but when I got to I was living in Houston, got to Dallas, and kind of saw where it was going to be, what the vision for it was, the sketches of the building, and realized this is a special project for the country, and how cool it would be to be part of it. That's what drew me to it. I was naive to how hard it is to raise $285 million. So that, luckily for me, it didn't deter me, because if I'd known at the beginning, oh, by the way, what does that mean? I'm like, oh boy, that's a tall order. But when you get a great team, you can get a lot of stuff done. And like, what does it mean? The concept of a national museum for Medal of Honor is not new. It's been around for a couple decades. I've learned from some of the more senior Medal of Honor recipients, and it just kind of, for whatever various reasons, in those years, never was able to get the momentum and the funding and the right site. And when the city of Arlington, Texas, which is the center of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, was selected in 2019, and then the project began in earnest in kind of basically COVID starting is when fundraising sort of started. Um, then it was the right spot, middle of the country, a lot of support here in Texas, and the right people were on board. Amazing architect. We got the support from the Texas Rangers ownership and the Dallas Cowboys ownership, which is right where the museum is nestled between those stadiums. And it had all the right ingredients for it to be success.
So one of the key, and I think they're putting up is a picture up there. So there's the a photograph of the museum. Describe for a moment, Chris. Can you see the photograph that we have there?
Yeah.
And describe for a moment that the portion that sits up above it. Is that just an architectural design, or is there something that is emblematic, or is that a symbol there on the top of the museum of that concrete area that's lifted in the air?
Yeah, that's the actual museum exhibit deck, and the architect's vision, which is really brilliant. He picked up a heavy piece of metal one day in his lab and thought, "Wow, this is forged by steel. This is a heavy burden to hold. What if we kind of support this heavy burden figuratively with the 5 branches of the military, which allow us to have the freedoms that we have?" And that's the symbolism of those 5 columns that you see, those giant columns supporting the whole structure. It's actually 40, as a real estate guy, you'll appreciate this. It's 40,000 square feet. That's 200 by 200 box. And each of those 5 points is 2.5 square feet. So it's roughly 12 square feet holding up 40,000 square feet. Every bit of building services, water, power, toilet supply and return, data cables, all of it goes through those 5 points. The only other thing that penetrates there are the staircases, which are these amazing spiral staircases and very impressive when you see them. And other than that, it's all supported by those 5 points. Really cool.
Reminds me of you in Bud's training and not wanting to let your side of the boat come down. I'm
going to steal that, because that's exactly what's going on. If one of those 5 pillars breaks, the whole thing falls.
You got it. So that's another angle of it. Let's go to the next one if we can. So that shows where it is in relation to the ballpark in Arlington, correct?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So it's right near there. Let's go to the next one. So there are a number of exhibits in there. I thought and if you see the helicopter there, let's go to the next one, because the next one also shows. Talk for a moment, Chris, about how you tried to bring certain either war incidents or areas where number of Medal of Honor recipients received it, to try and give people a sense of the service over self and what defined why so many people got Medals of Honor given what they were facing at that moment.
Absolutely. So it's actually a hard problem when you have 3,500 stories to tell. How do you pick? Certainly can't tell that in one exhibit. People couldn't get through them all. So how do you pick and choose what you're going to tell? We wanted to make sure there was a broad spectrum across Civil War to global war on terror, across all 5 service branches, geographically represented around our country. We've got, there's one woman Medal of Honor recipient there. So there's a number of stories that we knew we wanted to tell. And, but like you said correctly, there are certain places, certain events in our military history where there were a significant number of Medals of Honor. Guadalcanal that you see here, Iwo Jima, Vietnam, of course, and now present day in GWAT. Civil War, it was the only medal. Like now we have a sort of tiered system, Medal of Honor being at the apex all the way down to lesser levels medals for other activities to be recognized. But in the Civil War, it was either the Medal of Honor or you didn't have anything. And so there's a predominant number of those 3,500 are from the Civil War timeframe. And we also wanted to incorporate technology. You can't build a museum anymore. And I'm sort of a basic museum goer. If it's all plaques and text panels, I check out after, a few of those, and I'll meet you in the cafe. But so we wanted to keep it engaging for all ages, and not just the military buff of the family, but for everybody to enjoy. And so that example that you saw there is a wall that you can walk up, and there's sensors that know that you're approaching, and it illuminates and populates some things, and sound happens. It's really cool.
And Chris, there there's 60 Medal of Honor recipients still alive today. And the way you get the Medal of Honor is it must be a nomination within 3 years of the act, and then it must be awarded to you within the subsequent 2 years. So if it's beyond 5 years of when the incident happens, there's no ability to go back and award one either posthumously or just after that 5-year period of time. Am I correct on that?
Well, it's not that it's not possible. It just takes more. It takes Congress to get involved, and in that there's a few more steps, because it does happen where DoD will review an award, say a Navy Cross, for example, that happened years ago or decades ago, and through a review panel say, wow, that's commensurate with this other one that's a Medal of Honor. Like, we should elevate this one to also be a Medal of Honor. So that's why sometimes you'll see an award ceremony in the White House with a very old, elderly gentleman getting it. He clearly didn't do his action 5 years ago. And that's what it is. You typically is an upgrade to the medal, to a previous medal.
I could keep on going for another couple hours. I'm so fascinated by all you have done and all of the experience you've had in your life, and also being the father of 5 kids, and what it's taken for you to be able to be both a Navy SEAL and an astronaut in those enduring times of being away from your wife, Peggy. I wanted to go into that, but we're not going to have time today, but maybe you and I can talk about that at some time, because Peggy has endured you waking up one day and being deployed off with a SEAL team where she doesn't know where you're going and when you're coming home. And she's also seen you go up into space for 6 months and crossing your fingers that you were going to always come back. But that was not always guaranteed in that line of work. You are a true national treasure. I am super, super thankful of you taking the time to share your insights with us today, Chris. And I very much look forward to coming down, visiting the museum, and spending some time with you one-on-one.
Likewise, Willie. Thank you for your time.
Well, it's great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll be back next week with another Walker Webcast. And thanks again, Captain Cassidy. It was a real pleasure.